Oh, he's on.
We're good, Aaron? Okay. Good evening. Today is Tuesday, October 4th, and a special meeting of the Board of Directors is called to order. This is a work/planning session for the purposes of beginning the search for the next superintendent of Salem-Keizer Public Schools. As our CC media partner wasn't available to assist tonight, we are broadcasting this meeting ourselves using a Zoom webinar format. You may select a language in the Zoom app, and ASL will be available on screen. Thank you for your flexibility and choosing to listen in on tonight's meeting. I'll now take attendance. We are missing Director Guzman Ortiz. I believe she will be coming in a little bit. Director Hyan is on Zoom again, and Director Bethel is absent. Everybody else is in attendance. And I will now turn it over to one of our student advisors, Raylan Brennan, to read the diverse welcome message.
Buenas tardes, good afternoon, welcome y bienvenidos to the Salem-Keizer School Board meeting. At all times, whether we meet in person or virtual as we are tonight, we strive to be inclusive, respectful, and welcoming to our students, staff, educators, administrators, board members, and all community members. We welcome people of all genders, people of African descent, Black, African American, Asian descent, Arab descent, European descent, those who identify as Hispanic, Latinx, people of indigenous to this land, and people of mixed and multiple descents. Languages spoken in our communities are welcome: Spanish, English, indigenous languages, sign language, Chuukese, Somalian, Russian, Chinese, Vietnamese, and many more. People with disabilities, visible or invisible. People of all religions, believers in all faiths or creeds. Gay, lesbian, bisexual, heterosexual, pansexual, transgender, queer, two-spirit, or others for whom none of the labels fit. Survivors. Your emotions, joy, bliss, grief, rage, indignation, contentment, disappointment. Your families, genetic and otherwise. Our veterans who proudly served and are currently serving our country. Our elders, those here in this room, in our lives, and those who have passed away. People impacted or displaced by the war in Ukraine and other violent conflicts. Yes, and finally, we'd like to welcome the ancestors who lived in this land where we live and work. Welcome the spirits of the Santiam, Kalapuya, Siletz, and Grand Ronde. The natives who lived in this area before the Europeans came. Welcome y bienvenidos.
Thank you, Raylan. Okay, now please join me in standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Okay, I don't believe there are any agenda modifications for this evening. And so we're going to move right on to number 2 on our agenda, which is superintendent search planning. I'm very pleased to be welcoming Hank Harris from Human Capital Enterprises to our meeting this evening. He's here in the room with us. And then Kathleen Rodden-Nord is on Zoom. Hi, Kathleen. And the two of them will be facilitating tonight's discussion and meeting. We also have opted to just utilize first names for our discussion. So as long as that's okay with everyone, we can be a little less formal. Doesn't mean that this isn't one of the most important pieces of work that we're doing. Thank you. Go ahead, Hank.
Thank you, Ashley. It's really an honor for Kathleen and myself to be with you this evening. We realize you, we went through a process with you. You had multiple search firms from which to select. We are deeply honored that you selected our firm for this so important body of work that will be very impactful for your community, your students for years to come. So we are truly honored and pleased that we get to walk alongside you in this partnership. Thank you. Kathleen, anything you'd like to add?
Muted. There we go.
Sorry about that. I actually am generally pretty well versed in Zoom, but I just wanted to echo Hank's comments and thank you so much for providing us the opportunity to support you in this really important endeavor. It's been a pleasure to have the meetings we've had thus far, and we are really looking forward to rolling up our sleeves and digging into the work alongside you.
Thank you. Our first agenda item was introductions. I put that in there in case we didn't all have a chance to meet each other and say hello prior to this board meeting. And I think I certainly have had a chance to meet all of you. Kathleen has met most of you, although I don't know that Kathleen has met the student advisors. So maybe just a wave or a quick hello among you three. And if that's okay, thank you. I'll move to item number 2 on the agenda. And I realize our viewers at home may or may not have the agendas in front of them, but
At home, they're linked in the agenda on the
Okay.
website, and they're linked as supplemental materials
Perfect.
to the agenda. So if they go to the link, they'll be good to go.
thank you, Superintendent. Thank you, Christy. The next item is actually the one we're going probably to spend more time on. So I know we blocked out 2 hours for our meeting today. And if we spend 30 or 40 or 50 minutes on item number 2, please don't presume that our meeting will be 5 or 6 hours. It won't be. But typically this is where we spend the most amount of our time. And I would ask you to, as we talk about this and discuss with each other, if you would also look at the addendum, which is your draft superintendent search timeline. So what I would like to do, board, is I would like to walk you through a standard proposal of what a search could look like. We are happy and open, and this is part of the conversation, to tailor things as they need be. But as a starting point, we've put together a timeline of events and we've put together a timeline of dates. We have not checked the dates against your personal calendars, and that's actually one of the things that we'd like to do tonight. So hopefully you all have access to your digital or regular calendars, because we'll actually roll up our sleeves at some point and look at dates. How I'd like to approach this, though, is I'd like to start out by really focusing on the left-hand column and not worry about the right-hand column at this moment, because again, these are just dates that we're throwing out as boilerplates. But more importantly is to walk through what a search could look like, and maybe your search will look like. So we start where we are right now with what I like to call the engagement period, which you don't see specifically called out here, but the first steps in the process are our engagement time. You know that I spent most of my career here in Oregon as an educator. Kathleen spent, I think, all of her career as an educator in Oregon. We know the Oregon education landscape, but we don't know Salem-Keizer certainly as well as you do, certainly as well as our students who go to school every single day. And so we need to learn a lot about your district and where it is right now in this point in time. That's critical for us to be successful as your search consultants. So there are a few ways that we do that. Some we've already done. We had the opportunity to meet with almost all directors over the last 2 days. We're going to meet with our one more board director tomorrow morning. We'll be asking a series of questions and hearing your thoughts and dreams of aspirations of the Salem-Keizer School District. Let me speak to what those questions are, because the questions that we ask you as board directors are really similar. You're going to hear these themes come up as we talk about the search. In order for us to really understand your district, there are a few key things that we want to know. We want to know what's great about the Salem-Keizer schools. What do you do really well? What are you really proud of? What are the things that might cause somebody to pack up their bags and maybe pack up their family and say, you know what, I want to move to Salem, or I want to move to Salem, Oregon, and be the superintendent of schools. What is wonderful about this place? Second question that we ask is, what are the challenges that you know that the new superintendent, once they come on board July of 2023, what do you know that they're going to need to attend to? What are the big issues? What are the maybe not so big issues? What are the chronic issues? What are the complexities? What are the challenges? We know that being a superintendent is far from the easiest job in the world, and every district has initiatives and opportunities and things that need attention and things that they do better or not as well. And so we want to hear from you and the members of the community. What is this? What's going to be in, sometimes I call this the inbox question. What's going to be in the proverbial inbox of your new superintendent come July 1st, 2023 and onward for the coming months, maybe even the coming years that you'll know they'll have to tackle, or more likely bring people together to tackle. And the third question we ask is, what are the personal qualities and or the professional experiences that you would expect, you board members would expect to see in the pool of candidates that you're interviewing? When we talk to board members, and you will all remember, I think I asked all of you this question, I said it just like that. What are you hoping that you'll see in the paperwork and in the applications of the candidates that we bring forward? When we talk to folks in your community who are not board members, we say something similar. We say, if you were a member of the school board, what would you be looking for in these candidates? So just to repeat, the what's great question, the what's in your inbox question, and what are the qualities? Those are the three questions that get us to, and often those lead to other conversations as well, but let's think of those as sort of the core seminal questions that we're asking members of the Salem-Keizer community. So I bring that up because looks like we might have lost connection.
TV is off.
Are we okay?
I can still hear you. I can still see and hear you all. This is Kathleen.
Should I pause or?
I think you can go ahead.
I should go ahead. Okay. So while we've had the opportunity to begin these conversations, we realize that, and you realize too, that there's a lot of folks in Salem.
Okay.
Talking about really anybody that has a vested interest and that lives in these communities, whether you are a student, whether you are a parent, whether you work in this district, whether you're a community member that maybe once had children in the school, or maybe you're a community member that never had children in the school district, but you live in this vibrant community and you want to play a role in bringing it forward. Whoever you are, whatever your role is, you have a place in this process. How do you inform the process if you're a member of the community? There's a few ways, and actually two most salient ways. One is that we will have a number of engagement sessions. I'm gonna briefly talk about that now, and then we're gonna come back to that a little bit later on item number 5, where we're gonna go deep with small groups who represent a broad array of the community to really understand the Salem-Keizer story. Not everybody can be part of an engagement session when it's, thousands and thousands of people, but we want every voice to be heard. And so if you're not part of an engagement session, the way we'd like to hear your voice is through a survey, typically conducted online, but there are also ways that we can engage with a survey in non-online means. And sometimes so those are the two primary ways that we dive deep and learn about your community, again, through engagement sessions and through surveying your community. And we'll spend, if you for this one, I just want you to look sort of the right just for that, because you'll see there's about 10 or 11 days in there, and those are deep dive days. And Kathleen and myself, and also a third colleague, Jay Rallian, who is bilingual, will be engaged in those engagement opportunities. After we've completed the engagement opportunity, we look at what we've learned, and we look at all the inputs that have come in, and we put together a couple of parallel documents. And you see those documents listed down on the 5th one, the presentation of draft Salem-Keizer's next documents. So there is the next superintendent criteria, and there's a parallel document called the leadership summary. Those two documents are our attempt to to analyze all the rich inputs that have come in from your community members, answering those three questions. What's great? What are the challenges? And what are the qualities? The what's great and the what are the challenges question lends itself to one of the two documents, which I just referred to, called the leadership summary. It's a narrative. It reads like a story, and it's typically somewhere between 8 and 12 pages. And we use that not only to share with you what we've learned, but to share with candidates and prospective candidates. Here's what you're going to find if you're the next superintendent of Salem-Keizer. Here's what's wonderful, and here's what the challenges and complexities and opportunities are. This parallel document is the next superintendent criteria document, which attacks that third question. What are the qualities? Remember, we're asking you board members, what qualities and experiences are you looking for candidates? And we're also asking your community members that very same question. And we will synthesize that information to put together a set of criteria. That set of criteria is our best thinking, our best attempt to capture what the broad communities of Salem and Keizer want you to focus on. We'll present that to you as a draft and say, board, does this reflect your collective wisdom? And typically, because you are the decision makers, the community is there to inform you, but you are the decision makers. So that document needs to really reflect your collective dreams and aspirations and wisdom around what you're looking for in your next superintendent. So that's an actionable item. We'll typically look at that in a work session. You may make some changes. You may send it back to us to do further work. But ultimately, the board will adopt that document. And that's our marching orders, folks. That's what we use to go out and find great candidates who say, yeah, I think I might be interested in Salem-Keizer. Candidates themselves, or prospective candidates is probably a better term, will use that document to self-select. Am I what they're looking for? Am I not what they're looking for? And when we finally come back to interview and selection, you board will be using that document as a rubric, as a scoring guide, as a screening tool to ensure that you're operating collectively with fidelity to the agreed upon document. I'm going to take a little breath. I've gone through the first 5 items, and I want to make sure, and you've been very active listeners. I want to know if there's any clarifying questions before we move a little bit farther down into this document. Anything that wasn't clear, anything you want me to repeat, any questions you might have. Okay, let's move on. So after that document comes to the board, particularly the superintendent criteria document, and after the board has approved a version of that document, we are ready to open the recruitment window. And that's kind of just what it sounds like. That's when our team will roll up our sleeves. We will be reaching out to candidates close and far who we think are most likely to match that criteria. And I use a term, we engage our networks of networks. So we don't profess to know every possible person out there. But fortunately, you've hired a firm with, among us, a very strong regional and national network. And while we might not personally know the person that's going to be the next superintendent, we know people who know people. And we spend a lot of time on the phone with colleagues around the country, certainly around the region, to say, here's what Salem-Keizer is looking for. Who should we call? And that is more often than not the way we actually get to the candidate who ultimately emerges as the next soup. We also have an advertising strategy. That's not something we want to ignore, but the network of networks, I would argue, is actually even more important than putting advertisements up, but we take both approaches. So for a period roughly of a month, we are engaged in the recruitment process. We have an application portal on our website. We'll work with your communications department to make sure that it's well articulated what's happening with the search, and certainly it's articulated how someone applies. And at the end of that search process, we are ready to move into the third phase, which I call the selection phase. And if you're looking on the document, that would start with preliminary interviews. Let us hypothetically say, board, that there are 40 people who have thrown their hat in the ring and have said, I want to be considered to be the next superintendent of Salem-Keizer. So that means we are sitting with 40 applications. The first thing I want to stress is, board, you will be able to see all 40 applications. There's no point where we hide things from you or say, nah, they're not good enough for the board. You will get to see every application. And you will get to select from any application. And we also think that you've hired us, among other things, to help you sort of winnow and help inform your process. And so what we will do as a first step is we will make a preliminary selection of those 40. And I'm going to throw out numbers. These are all hypothetical, right? We don't have applicants yet, so I don't know how many will apply. Let's just arguably say that there are 10 of those 40 candidates that we feel most closely match your next criteria document and that sufficiently impress us with their abilities that we think, this could be the person that the board selects as their next superintendent. So with the hypothetical 10, group of 10, Kathleen and I and Jay will engage in preliminary virtual interviews with those candidates. And we will interview them virtually. One of us will be asking the questions. One of us will be transcribing. Both Kathleen and myself are super good at typing fast. That is an important criteria if you're going to work for human capital enterprises. So we will, as best as possible, transcribe. And while it's not verbatim, it's actually pretty close to verbatim. We will also do a preliminary telephone reference check at that point on the group of 10. And then we will come to you on a certain date. On this calendar, the proposed date is January 10th, but it could be another date. And we, board, will meet with you in a nice long day. Oftentimes boards want that to be on a weekend. I think the 10th might not be a weekend, but we can work with whatever works best for you. And the day starts with you looking through the application materials. And we have the morning to do that. And everybody reads applications differently. And some of you will want to read all 40 of the applications and we'll make time for that. And some of you will say, I think if I read 20 of the 40, I think that's enough. But yeah, certainly we're going to push you hard to read at least the 10 that we've recommended for your further consideration. So the morning's a study time, a learning time, a reading time. We always make sure that there's lots of coffee there in the morning. And in the later part of the day, you board convene and we facilitate a conversation around, okay, of these 40, of which we have interviewed 10, but there's 40 applications, who do you want to invite for your first round interviews? This is an executive session, by the way, completely confidential other than those present in the room, which is really the board and your consultants and your counsel. At the end of the day, again, I'm going to throw out a number, but 5 or 6 is a good number for the board to land on. So let's say you pick 6. So at the end of the day, the board has decided to interview 6 candidates. We get on the phone and we notify those candidates that they are in the initial interview, the first round of board interviews. Okay. Ashley.
Thank you, Hank. Okay, so just to clarify, HCE would have done the preliminary interviews with potentially 10. But then after that, we come together and see beyond the 10 potentially.
Yes, and
Okay.
I don't know if I know that, and you weren't asking this, but sometimes the fact that I refer to that second event as the first round interviews could be a little confusing. So if that happened, it's almost like the virtual interviews are the 0 round interview and the board is the first round. But to your question, so if there's 40 applicants, you have access to all 40 applications. And you can select from any of the 40. And what more often happens is that you or one of your board colleagues might say, Hank, Kathleen, I noticed you didn't choose to interview Sally Smith. Why? And we will present a rationale. But ultimately, you and your board colleagues would say, notwithstanding that, we think that's a really good candidate. So let's move forward and let's invite her forward.
Okay. Is there, just out of curiosity, is there a reason why you don't want us to do that prior to your doing those preliminary interviews?
We want to save you from, so in a hypothetical group of 40 where there are 10 that
Mhm.
rise, our experience is that other 30 are probably not worth, I want to be careful and not insult a possible candidate, but I want to save the board from the time. It takes a long time to read 30 applications.
Yeah.
So if we have read 30 applications and we together say, might be a wonderful person, but does not hit enough of those points on the criteria list. We feel like that's probably something you would want us to do to save the board, the collective energy from having to read those extra 30 applications when we feel fairly strongly that that person wouldn't get to. I will say in all the search, and I always make sure boards see all the applications, but I've never actually once had the board select somebody that wasn't part of the virtual interviews, because there is a gap. And if somebody looks at like they have potential to actually meet enough, then we would certainly want to err on the side of interviewing them.
Okay, thank you.
If you're comfortable with that, and if we can tailor it too, if the board feels differently.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds good to me. It seems like it would be it might slow our timeline if you've done the preliminaries because they rose to the top based on our criteria. And then we say, oh, and we want to add these 5 from the original stack of 40. So that's why I was asking.
And that could get a little clumsy, but we absolutely would do that if that's what the board
really
wanted
wanted
to.
that. Okay.
Absolutely would.
Okay.
Can I ask this one follow-up
Mhm.
clarification? So if that happened, then would you and Kathleen then do that virtual interview with the extra 5 too before the first? round?
Yeah, I'm gonna assume that it would not be an extra 5. So let's say there was an extra 1. We would certainly do that. We would
Okay.
certainly do that.
So the virtual, the 0 interview, everyone would.
We would absolutely do that. Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Isaac?
You had mentioned that some of the meetings were going to be executive sessions regarding the superintendent search. Would Raylan and I be allowed in those sessions, or is that still an executive session without Raylan and I?
So I think that would, I'll look at, I think Paul will have to weigh in and the board would have to decide.
Right, yeah, the board can invite non-board members, of which you're board advisors, but not board members. I mean, this is a confidential process, and so all board members are going to be asked to for confidentiality, and so we would need to discuss that with the board leadership and the board.
Thank
Which I
you.
think is going to be part of our discussion today, right? Around confidentiality.
Yes, yes.
If I might, just to dovetail some of the things that Hank is saying. His outline follows very well the Oregon Public Meeting Law that you have to comply with too. In order to have an executive session, you have to have hiring standards. And you've heard from Hank today, some of the hiring standards and the process that he's using. The criteria for this new superintendent, which is, as Hank has said, the personal qualities, the life experiences, the professional experiences. You'll have fleshed that out in your discussions, and your community will help you do that. The public needs to comment on what you ultimately come up with in terms of hiring standards and the criteria. And once you do that and approve the hiring standards and the criteria, then you will be able to meet in an executive session. So I'm going to help Hank formulate where these things belong within those categories. So as you get ready to approve things, you can satisfy the Oregon law part of this.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Appreciate. Okay. Thank you. So thank you, board. I'll move forward. We might not spend an hour and a half on this particular agenda item. So we've, to use our numbers, our hypothetical numbers, I think we said that there were 40 applicants, hypothetical, 10 selected for preliminary interviews, and the board then selects 6 for their first round interviews. Those first round interviews, we strongly recommend are virtual. In the old days, they weren't, but we've learned that they can be effective and maybe even more effective, and certainly very cost effective to engage with your first round interviewees in a virtual. So that's what we would recommend. And that is the second time in the search that you're going to spend the better part of a day together with us. Interviewing 6 folks takes a fair amount of time. Go through that. It tends to be a very adrenaline-y day, a little bit tiring, but also exhilarating at the same time. And when you complete that day, at the end of that day of interviewing the hypothetical 6, you're going to land on your finalists. I'm going to hypothetically say that you select 3. Is that, how many fingers did you have, Osvaldo? 3, 2? Osvaldo says 2. I'm going to hypothetically say 2 finalists. It is your choice. Probably should be somewhere between 2 and 4, and 4 is a lot. So it really should be somewhere between 2 and 3, and let's go with 2. Okay. So now you have 2 finalists. You've completed your first round interview. You have 2 finalists. Those 2 finalists, the very next day, this part is not on your sheet because this is really between your search consultants and the candidates. We'll be in touch with them. We'll begin much more comprehensive reference checks. We'd love for board members to play a role in that, so we'll talk about that at a later date. We will bring in a third-party investigative entity that focuses, that is their business, is investigations, to do a deep investigation from everything to make sure that the university that the person said they attended, they actually attended, credit records, other important driver's records, criminal records, and so forth, to make sure that there are no untoward surprises. I will say that prior to getting this, we asked the candidates no fewer than 2 times, are there any skeletons in your closet we should know about? So, and most of the candidates will actually willingly, and sometimes it's kind of interesting, something they think is a skeleton is like, when I was in junior high school, I got suspended for, whatever. I mean, so that shows us actually such a high level of integrity of a candidate that would be the worst thing that they could find. But we do want to make sure, obviously, and I know you would want us to make sure that when you get to the end of this process, that that none of us are caught off guard by something untoward that we never knew about till the end. So, but at this point in the process, we're going to go deep. We're going to bring in an investigative entity to do a comprehensive background check on the candidate or the candidates. At this point, we're saying hypothetically we have 2. So telephone reference checks, full background checks, and then we move into what does it look like in that final round. And we're going to talk a little bit. I'm going to give you again the recommended, and then as we get into other parts of the agenda, we might talk about how that might look a little differently. What we're going to recommend for Salem-Keizer is that after you've met with your 6, but before you meet with 2 of them for a second time, that those 2 finalists actually have an interview with community members. And we will figure out, not tonight, but at some other point before too long, how community members are selected, how many students, how many staff, how many parents, those things, those details are important, but they're not important to figure out tonight. The purpose of that, we call it community-based interviews here on your timeline. And the purpose of that is for community members to really interrogate these candidates and provide feedback for board members. Notice I did not say that their job is to select their favorite. That is not ever the job of the community. It rests squarely, decision and selection rests squarely on your 14 shoulders, your 7 board members, 2 shoulders each. That's your call. So, but the community members interview and provide really rich feedback. Should I have said 18 shoulders? Is that what I should have said? Okay, 14 or 18 shoulders. And community members typically take this role very, very seriously, are really invested, really interested, and want to provide you with really meaningful feedback. You will get that feedback prior to your second interview. So when you arrive on this now, the finalist second round interviews, you typically have 2 hours with each finalist. That's a lot of time. And I didn't say this earlier, but you might be wondering what's the composition, or what kind of interviews are we talking about? And let me say what I mean by that. Up till the second round interview, when we are conducting our virtual preliminary interviews, when the board is conducting their first round interviews, and when the community is conducting their community interviews, we both have strong HR backgrounds, and we build an interview script, interview questions based completely on your your next superintendent criteria. We hold firm to fidelityly asking those questions. So every candidate has the same experience. We invite board members, we invite you to help construct those interview questions if you want, but once they're established, they're established. At the second round interview, we believe that we can take some liberties and actually have an unscripted interview. So at that second round interview, I want you to picture yourself. You are coming into the interview room prior to the candidates getting there. You've already met these folks before. You've already looked at their paperwork. You've been thinking about them probably nonstop for the last 3 weeks. And now you have a whole mound of community input around each of those candidates. So you've got a ton of input. And it's going to be your job to figure out what you want to ask each of those candidates. And in this final round, you can, as long as the questions are not illegal, so we'll talk about that, you can probe in different directions for the different candidates. So you are going to build your own interview. You're going to build your own interviews that morning. That we have a study time where you collectively and individually look at all this data you have and you say, I want to ask this person about this. I want to ask this person about that. I realize this person never spoke about, early childhood education. I want to make sure we zero in on that. And in a couple of hours, you can get a lot. You've also got telephone reference checks that you're reviewing. You've also got a background check. There's a lot of stuff to go through. At the end of that day, you have completed your interview process and we convene and we see where we're at, board. And you might be moving toward landing the search. Now, there are rules around, and Paul will keep me straight and narrow and keep all of us on that. But what you can do in executive session and what you can't. What you can't do is you can't make your decision on who your next superintendent is in executive session. So you can't do that. So we'll walk you through how does that work. But going back to this, there might be at the end of that finalist interviews, there might be a sense that the board is ready to move forward with final pieces around 1 or 2 candidates. We hope that this is all completed by sometime in February. That would put you really very close, if not at the front of the superintendent searches for the season, certainly in this part of the country. It would also give some time, depending on whether that person is seated in another district, and likely they will be, but not necessarily, but it should give some opportunity, even if they have a full-time job in another district, to have some degree of transition with Superintendent Christie. So that's sort of the kind of a recommended path. I want to open to questions, not only to sort of maybe clarification questions, but also any thoughts you have about something that either sits right, like, yes, let's do this, or questions you have about, could we do something slightly different? And let's do that for a little bit, and then let's look at some possible dates.
Marty has a question.
Thank you. Would you share your email address just in case along the way there's like a process question, or we have suggestions for some of your small community engagement that we have a way to communicate with you?
Yes, I'll make sure that you have our email addresses, and we're going to talk those 2 things that you just mentioned. So one is about thoughts about folks for engagement, and the other is thoughts about process. I think we're going to hit both of those also in the agenda as well, but absolutely you'll have our email addresses.
Thanks, Hank. I'm curious, the community-based interviews, what information can the board expect from those, or in what format?
Okay, great. What we typically do is we give you 2 kinds of format from community members. One is collective and one is individual. So after the community members interview candidate A, we will spend time in a group debrief, and we'll talk about hot, warm and cool feedback. I don't know if you use that protocol, but that's typically the protocol we use. What stands out to you and what really resonates with you around this candidate vis-a-vis the next superintendent criteria, and then what maybe doesn't resonate. And we'll track that, and that becomes the collective feedback, the group feedback. You'll get that. And then in addition to that, when that is done, we ask each community member to complete individually to complete an online survey. And well, it's like a Survey Monkey survey. And that, of course, you're familiar with, and that's an individual response. And you'll get both of those from each for each candidate. Satya.
And the question is, we have like 110 languages spoken in our community. So some of these surveys, will it be in different languages?
Yes, and can I hold that till item number 7 on the agenda? Thank you, Satya. Yep. So board, could we look at some dates? Could we pull out our calendars and do a little work on that? We feel really strongly that before this process opens, that we have a clear calendar so that candidates who are serious about this can mark their own calendars off. You can all imagine if you've ever been in a hiring process yourself and you're called 2 days before an interview that you had no idea was supposed to happen and suddenly you're supposed to clear your calendars. Has that happened to anybody? So we don't want that. We want to respect our candidates enough to give them plenty of heads up that what the process is and what the timeline is. I'd love to start with, we already hit the first 2 because tonight's October 4th. I want to point to, you don't necessarily need to calendar all of these events because some of these are really more about community members or about ourselves and candidates. So if I can, I'd love to start with the item number 5, it's 5 rows down. It's the presentation of the draft, because that would be an open session, probably a special board meeting. I don't think you have a board meeting scheduled on November 30th. And I'm curious if we could schedule that for a 90-minute special meeting on November 30th. Is there?
For me. We likely will not have one on the 22nd. Typically, I'm understanding the week of Thanksgiving, we don't have our Tuesday meeting. So this would be a week and a day later.
Well, and I just want to clarify, do we want to do November 30th? Because that's a Wednesday, and I know that normally our meetings are on Tuesdays, which would be November 29th.
I think there might have been a reason why I couldn't, but if you'll bear with me one moment.
I can come on the 30th, but maybe I'm not sure about the 29th.
Okay, thanks, Marty.
I think either of those dates will work for me.
Satya,
I'm okay with 30th.
prefer the 30th or?
But 30th, I mean, let's find a day which all of us can be there.
Osvaldo?
Either is fine for me.
Rena? Either is fine for me too.
Either is fine for me too.
This is just like a 6 to 9. Yeah, either one would work for me. I think probably the 29th would be better.
You said 90 minutes, so probably normal start time of 6.
Yeah.
Do we have a consensus?
It seems like there's a leaning towards the 29th. The only person I've heard prefer 30th is Satya, right?
And Marty.
Oh,
I
and Marty.
cannot guarantee I can be there the 29th. I can be there the 30th.
Okay,
I prefer a day when all can be.
yeah,
So
so would I. Raylin, are you not free the 29th?
I have rehearsals.
Okay.
and So I have rehearsals, so and during November, because it's inching closer to our show date, rehearsals will be going until 9. And so Tuesdays have been like my blocked out board days, and so Wednesdays I can't do.
So I think for purposes of the board, I don't know Danielle's availability, but the board directors that are here can be there the 30th. So let's just go with that for now.
Okay. The next date I want to ask you, thank you, board. The next date I want to ask you about is so I be prepared, and I think I already alluded to it, but I'm going to say it again. There are typically 3 days that we want to be together for a long time, and the first of which would be the slate date. That's the date that in the morning that you're reviewing applications, and in the late afternoon, you are making decisions. So that could be something like 8 a.m. to 5 or 6 p.m. day, or you could shift that to start later and later. Recognizing that if it's a work day, that certainly, if it's a weekday, that it impedes people who have jobs as well as students who have school. And January 10th is a
Tuesday.
That's what I thought. So shame on me for throwing January 10th on the calendar. How do board members feel about spending a weekend day together?
Great. Did you say great?
Yes.
Yeah, I think with January 14th.
The 14th might be best too.
14th?
Ashley, I can do the 14th.
Okay.
Great.
Holiday weekend.
It is a holiday weekend.
Yeah.
I just realized that. Oh, the January 14th is a holiday weekend because Monday. Huh? Yeah.
Does that change our thinking or our availability?
Yeah.
Not you.
I have
Okay.
a lot.
Oh, the 14th is your birthday?
16th.
Okay, okay.
That weekend is birthday tournament.
Well, if you do it the weekend before, that's my birthday. So one of us might have to suffer.
Do the weekend before.
I mean, I think we can make it work, but I just wonder if plans will change. I mean, like how people might feel. How about the 7th? Is that
I might be out of the country on the 7th.
still beyond? And the 8th?
The 8th is my birthday. I'd prefer not to spend the whole day with you as much as I really enjoy your company.
Okay,
Unless
remind me.
it's a Sunday.
And,
I'm not interested in a Sunday.
okay, and to be clear, we're spending the time together virtually on that day, so that in case that wasn't clear. So
So no cake? Oh, come on.
everybody's gonna have their own cake at their own house.
How many hours are them?
I would say 7 hours is probably what we should block out.
That pushes. In that case, I think we should just go with the 14th.
Well, the other thing.
Would the
is-
21st work? The next Saturday?
Okay, so
Because the other thing is for Isaac and I, a lot of.
I think you're gonna need to put your down here.
I forgot about this. Another reason why the 14th and the 15th doesn't work is because there are a lot of college applications are due on the 15th. And so we will be filling those out. Hopefully we'll have them done, but probably not.
Realistically. Is the 21st an option for you, Hank?
It certainly is. Now, if we do the 21st, you'll notice that I recommended that your interviews were on the 21st, so it would push the process a week out. If the board's comfortable with that. So we're looking at finalist interviews mid-February rather than the first week of February, but certainly we can accommodate that. Should we try that?
I would be. Good.
yeah, does January 21st work for the board members on this side of the dais?
It works for me. I'm just wondering if that's gonna then, if we're gonna then have like President's long holiday weekend in the middle of February, like anyways, but we'll get there when we get there.
Yeah, let's get there when we get there. Good, I mean, good heads up. Yeah. Okay, so,
21st?
21st should work.
and Kathleen, I think I already know your schedule. You're good on the 21st, right? No?
I'm potentially not. It's daughter's 21st birthday and we were just planning a trip to San Francisco to see her. So I know you and I have some things we're doing earlier that week. but
Okay.
But that's, I'm not,
And I can pull in Jay if that becomes something that
Yeah.
you, okay.
Tia, what about you?
So what did we arrive at 21st?
Yeah.
January's presentation of slate?
No, January,
Yes.
January 21st presentation of slate, closed session.
I mean, majority is
You're good.
agreed to that, so we'll all agree.
Great.
Marty, are you available January 21st?
As far as I know, I should be, yes.
Okay, so
And you said it was a virtual meeting?
Wait, you know what? I've confused everybody and
Okay.
I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. Sometimes I confuse myself. So January 21st is a presentation of slate. I'm sorry, that is not a virtual. So that is when we actually do get together. And I apologize because I said the opposite a minute ago.
Yeah.
January 21st is in person together, where we're looking at paperwork and we're making a decision together. You're making a decision together as a board in person. My apologies. Does that change
Yeah, does
January
that
21st for
impact
anybody?
anyone's availability?
I think I can still make that work. So are we talking 8 to 5? And if we are, can I lobby for 9 to 6?
9 to 4.
Can I agree with Director Hyen and push it later?
I think 9 to 5 could work. I don't think you need that extra hour. Okay, thank you, board. Thank you for your grace when I misspoke.
No.
So if we have the slate on the 21st, which sounds like we're doing, then we need to set up our first round interviews. And that takes, I would be suggesting at this point that we push our initial interview. So that is a day that is virtual. It's going to be several hours, but it is a virtual. So you can do it from the comfort of your home, or if you're traveling, as long as you block out the day. I'm going to look at my calendar and throw an option, but
And would this be a couple of hours or?
this is a long day. This
Long
would
day.
be, I would say 8 a.m. to, don't kill me, 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. is probably about what we're looking at.
Okay, as long as there's plenty of coffee.
Lenny. Again, this one's virtual, so I will be sending coffee to your home.
Oh, I'll just make sure that I have an extra large coffee pot that day.
This means we can be in our pajamas, right? Since it's so early.
That too. Oh, maybe my hoodie will make a CCTV media appearance.
Oh, no.
Just brush your teeth, please.
Does January 28 work for folks? This is great, board. I know this is a big time commitment, so thank you. Can I assume January 28 is good? I don't know if I necessarily heard yes from everybody, but I don't think I heard any no. Chair Ashley, I'm going to defer to you to tell me if that's good.
Osvaldo?
I have to be tentative right now. I have to confirm already scheduled plans.
Can you give me the time frame again? Sorry for the 28th.
Sure, it really is a full day, so I would say we start at 8 a.m. We commit to being there as late as 7 p.m. You might be interviewing 6 candidates over the course of that day, so that is time intensive.
And it's virtual.
And it's virtual. Director Satya, do you know when you would know for sure, when you would be able to confirm?
I will agree to that.
Okay,
I'm pretty much in.
was it you, Director Osvaldo, that had a problem with that date?
Potentially, but
I am sorry.
I should be okay.
Okay, thank you. I heard a voice from that direction. I'm sorry. Okay, so Director Ashley,
I'm just doing the calendaring as we agree. So
okay,
I can do the 28th.
wonderful. Okay, folks, we've got 2 out of the 3 dates down. We only got to nail one more day. This would be the day of the final interviews. If we have our first round on the 28th, we would want 2 weeks because that's how long it takes to get background checks and reference checks done. 2 weeks after January 28th is February 11th, which did somebody say that Is that a holiday weekend, February 11th?
I have a question.
Yes.
The November 30, is that a in person or virtual? I can't remember. I didn't write it down. That in person?
Presentation of draft Salem-Keizer's next superintendent criteria.
I would say that could go, that could be hybrid.
Hybrid,
And
okay.
yeah, I mean, and sometimes we are in here in person if you want us, and sometimes we've delivered that virtually also. So I would say that's optional.
All right, thank you.
Well, since it's an
That's in
open,
an open session.
yeah, since it's in an open session, technically it's in person.
For the board. Okay.
Yes. Okay.
Okay, so what about your final interviews on Saturday, February 11th?
I'm seeing head nods.
And Cal, I'm suggesting for that.
Yes, Satya?
Is that the one listed as finalist second interviews in closed session?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay. February length is okay.
I would say it's similar in duration to the first round interviews. You're certainly having fewer candidates, but it's a longer period of time, and there's the deliberation, which could take longer. So I would say we're looking at like 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. kind of thing.
And that will
Virtual
also,
or in person?
It should be, this certainly should be in person. This is the finalist round. Yep.
And this is an executive session, correct?
Yes, yes. Yes.
Depends on the Super Bowl.
oh, yeah, yeah.
Is that the day before? Wait, is the Super Bowl Saturday or Sunday? That's
Super Bowl
Sunday.
Well, it will help us see if the future superintendent puts us before the Super Bowl, you know, priorities.
No, it should be fun. I'm in.
Thank you for raising that.
So what I heard is Super Bowl party at Osvaldo's house.
Oh, I like it. I like it.
What I mean is if my team goes, I might go. No, but I'm in for February 11th.
Okay.
Okay, 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. in person, finalist interviews, Saturday, February 11th. Yep. Accurate?
Yep. Okay. Great, board. Thank you. So we'll, as Paul shared earlier, so whatever sort of tentative decisions we might be looking at today, you will finalize in approval at one of your next board meetings.
To clarify,
Yep.
is number 12 board needs to identify preferred candidates part of the?
Yes, yes and no. So, so what'll happen on that day is you'll interview your finalists. We will convene following that to deliberate. Sometimes a couple hours deliberation is sufficient. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes the board's like, you know what? I can't make up my mind. There's so much, or we're not quite aligned. We need to sort of think about this for a couple more days. So there could be, but I don't want to worry about you about that right now, but there could be a subsequent, we're going to have another executive session 3 or 4 days hence for a couple of hours after we've had time to sit on this, chew on it, think about options. So we won't schedule that at this point. Satya?
I just have a curious question. So this, let's say we identify tentative 1 or 2 candidates, and they meet the community. Do the candidate and their, say, partner decide to come to Salem and literally see the city or have a meal with us, or just to understand?
Let's talk about that shortly. That's a great question. And that's a great question. I think we're going to hit that just in a few moments.
Right, because I just want to know before you go to the final round, because, let's say somebody is a diverse candidate, how they feel here and they can feel their roots here. That's the reason I just.
Yeah.
Before you launch the final rounds, is there a place before the final rounds that they come here?
We're going to talk about that in number 8 on the agenda. That's an important topic. And I want to make sure we cover that.
All right.
Thank you. All right, board. Well, we got through the first agenda item. So well done. And that was the hardest one. And thank you thank you honestly for committing. It's a time commitment. I know you knew that ahead of time, but I also know giving up 3 weekend days in a relatively short period away from your family and your lives is a big deal. Thank you for your commitment to this work, as well as the commitment you do every day as a board member. I'm going to move to communication norms, which is the next topic. And as I shared with you earlier, we spent a lot of time on number 2. We will not spend that much time on each of the agenda items. And this one also will be relatively short agenda items. So let's talk about communication norms and our question earlier about how do you communicate with us and so forth. So you will, if you don't already have our email addresses, which are on the website, for instance, you'll certainly have them. The way that we typically work is we want to communicate, and it feels a little formal, but you're board member, so you understand formality, right? So when we want to communicate with you, we will typically have a board liaison, and most of the time that person is the executive assistant to the superintendent. So I saw Christy Perry nod. So what we would do is we would communicate to Alice, and Alice would forward the email to all board members. That's how we keep you up to date of things. So that's how we communicate to you. Let's say you have a question of us. Now, this might or may not be your normal protocol. Our normal protocol is based on what we've experienced with most boards, which is, let's say a director has a question for us. Might be a big issue, might be a relatively small issue. We would ask the director to email us with a CC to your board colleagues. Is that how you operate now? Does that sound relatively normal?
We can't CC board colleagues more than 2, I believe. But we can send it through the board liaison and they can disperse it. I think that's, correct me if I'm wrong.
You can send to all, but you can't start an answer and
Discuss.
and discuss. So you can send to all, it's not a problem.
Thank you.
And I want to make sure we're not doing anything that's going to violate the norms of how Salem-Keizer does business. So if that's comfortable, you could email, so to repeat, you could email us with a CC to your board colleagues. We would, if it warrants a reply, we would reply with a CC to the board, and that should end the conversation. Does that work? Okay.
You can do that, but the
You gotta
board
get closer,
members
Paul.
cannot.
You gotta
Yeah,
get
Paul, you
closer
have to go in your mic or the public can't hear.
Yes, you can communicate back to the full board, but the board can't have a communication between themselves about your communication.
Right. That's how we see that too. Right.
So the way it would go is a director emails you with a question, CCs their colleagues, you respond to reply all, but that's where it has to stop. There can't be further.
Right. That's
back and
how,
forth.
okay. That's how we would like to operate. Thank you.
I have a question, Paul. So if I send an email and then I CC all board members and I get a response, but then the response is such that I have an additional question, am I not allowed to email him back?
Well, we would just treat that as a second question. I mean, you could have an endless stream of questions to Hank. You just can't be discussing it amongst yourself.
Right, but then we would have a bunch of disjointed emails. There'd be no common thread between the question asker and the question answerer. If I needed a clarification or something on his response, then I have to start a whole new thread.
No, I think you can respond to that email to that. So in this example, Hank's response causes another board member to have a question. So you email Hank the question that you have that's all related to this email string. And as long as individual board members are responding to Hank with a CC to their board, to their fellow members, that's not, the board's not communicating or deliberating with each other.
Okay.
We can help if there's questions that come up about this. We can certainly review it before anybody hits the send button.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. And actually, sometimes what we've also done is if it seems like there's something that needs to be agendized, then we agendize that for an upcoming board meeting.
I'd like to request that we take a 10-minute break. Is that okay?
Great, of course.
Okay. Great. We will stand in recess until 7:18. 7:18. let's get started again. We good to go, Erin? Okay. Great. I think we're probably ready to move on to communication norms.
I think we are. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you're
Okay.
good.
Communication norms. So, I think we're finishing up communication norms, right? So to just repeat what I think I've heard and learned from the board and council is, we talked about how to get in touch with us and the email processes associated. So you would email us with a CC to your board colleagues. We could reply. You would not communicate with each other via email on a question. And if it got to the point that we need to agendize an item, we would, and we bring that up to open session. The other thing, there's another thing around communication norms that I'm going to ask for a nod of this from board members is this. This is a different aspect of the communication norms. So as we really starting today, as we move forward into the preliminary stages of this search, we would like to be your exclusive search consultant. We are your exclusive search consultant. We would like to be your exclusive conduit to candidates. What does that mean? That means that it could happen, it could very well happen that a candidate or a prospect being somebody who's thinking about applying, could reach out to you. Maybe they reach out to you from the web, or maybe they know somebody who knows you and says, hey, I want to talk about the Salem-Keizer School District. So board members, because you are in a position of hiring and authority, we want you to not engage with prospects starting tonight and simply say, thank you so much for your interest. Let me give you the email address of our search consultant. It keeps everything fair and equitable. It doesn't give certain people a leg up and certain people a leg down. So, so before I ask for a nod, the other thing, which is maybe even more likely that you'll get, is somebody to call you up. I call this person a source. This person is not a prospect, but this person has a great idea for somebody who might be the next Salem-Keizer superintendent, and they know you, and they're going to call you and say, you know, so-and-so is thinking of applying and they're really amazing, and I just want to be a bug in your ear and tell you that. So we want you to say, thank you very much. Please give that information to Hank Harris or Kathleen. We don't want you to own that. We don't want you to do anything with that information. We just want you to pass that person. We want you to pass that person on to us. We don't want you to take notes and tell us. We want that person to come to us so that you are really kept out of any kind of lobbying. So I'm hoping that you will all nod and say, yeah, that makes sense. We agree. Sir?
Yes, I agree. Does it have to be something that we have to write, like an agreement, we sign an agreement just to?
This particular thing, no, I'm comfortable with this person if we have just an agreement that that's how we'll handle things.
It shouldn't look like there is some kind of conflict of interest. So would it be important or necessary? Just a nod is enough, or yes is enough, or verbal or written?
You're asking about it like signing a
Yeah,
confidential.
just like,
Yeah.
because you make us sign for the confidentiality. In the same way, could
Yeah.
that be added to that?
If you'd like, so we're jumping ahead, but I think you know where my head is going. I am actually going to ask the board to sign around confidentiality of candidates. If you would like, I can also add language around what I just described, and then you're also signing that if that's your suggestion. I'm not opposed to that. Satya?
Yeah, I propose that if my board colleagues are in agreement, but it kind of makes it kind of kosher, so it's above ground.
Yep.
Everybody is in the agreement that there will be no conflict of interest, and it really protects as a board, as an entity. And then you, as a search firm, will also be able to say, this is what, it gives more
Okay, yeah.
credence to that.
Perfect. Is there anybody who is not comfortable with what Director Satya just suggested?
So I have a question. So
Yes.
if, can't think of anybody offhand, okay? But if I knew somebody I thought would make a great superintendent for this district,
Yes.
I'm not going to say, I can't say anything to you because of conflict of interest. I'm going to say, this is the process. You go apply with them. And, you know, if they happen to make it to the final cut, then at that point, I would certainly say, I know this person.
Perfect. That's absolutely perfect. That's absolutely perfect. Yeah. Okay, great. I think we've completed communication norms. Thank you for that friendly amendment. Let's talk about staff support, and staff support is what it sounds like. We need some staff to help support us in 3 areas. I think I might even know who might fall into these categories. So in this case, I'm probably looking at the superintendent more than I am for board members. A is what we sort of already talked about. So we need a liaison who's going to deal with communication flow, who also deal with logistics like what room are we meeting in or that sort of thing. I think Superintendent Christy Perry, that would be Alice.
That would be
believe.
Alice.
Okay.
Yeah.
The second one is, and we're going to get to this very shortly, what are these engagement sessions? But once we get to the engagement sessions, we need somebody to coordinate those and deal with RSVPs and invitations and tracking that. And that would be
Someone in comms.
Okay.
I think it's going to be Caleb.
okay. Great. And the third one is the person that owns the website and particularly the portal within the website, which will be about the superintendent search, which will be a prolific part of your website over the next few months. And that person will be
Brian Anderson.
Brian Anderson. Okay, great. Okay. And with respect to that middle one, should I work with you, superintendent, or with Sylvia on who that person is?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, great. We completed item number 4. Let's look at and it's the question that we heard earlier about engagement sessions and what those look like. So the role of the board in the engagement sessions is to help guide what is the composition of the engagement sessions? And by composition, I don't mean names of people, but rather roles of people that would participate in this. It's important for us to hear from a broad array of stakeholders. Remember, the majority of folks who inform the process will do so through an online survey, but it's really important that we meet with an array of community members. And we actually have two objectives in those meetings. So let me color those lines in so it's clear what we're trying to do. We have 2 outcomes. And I've spoken to them earlier, but not at the same time. So let me bring them together. One of them is we need to learn the district. We need to learn it really well and really deeply. So part of it is we need to talk to folks who can help us dive deeply. We shouldn't be any surprise that we would like to talk to the superintendent about where we are at this point in time in the Salem-Keizer School District. The second objective is those 3 questions. What's great about Salem-Keizer? What are the complexities the new superintendent will face? And what are the qualities that one would look for? So both of those things. So you're going to see in this list folks who will inform both parts of that. And some folks are going to inform more the second aspect, and some folks are going to inform more the first aspect. But that's why you're seeing, certainly in the first items, senior staff is very well represented in here, but we certainly want to hear from the entirety of the community, students and families and parents and community members and staff who populate schools. So this list, let me just give a little bit more verbiage around this. So we're contracted to do 20 engagement sessions with you. We can do more than that. I would say 30 is probably the maximum that makes sense. So we probably want to land somewhere between 20 and 30. And I would like you, as you're probably already doing, looking down this list, you'll see that there are in the top area, the first 17, you'll see there's, I'm going to call them roles of people that we think is really important for us to connect to do one or both of those objectives of doing the deep dive and asking about the dreams and aspirations. And every district's different. So every district has different configurations or different groups of invested individuals, and sometimes they have certain group names or whatever. We don't know that. Your staff knows that and you know that. So I want you picturing in your mind, who are the folks that Hank and Kathleen and Jay need to engage with in this engagement session, and what roles do they fill? We are not, at tonight's meeting, we're not going to be making decisions around that, and we're not going to be naming names. I want to just first make sure that you understand the question as I pose it, and then I want to talk about Okay, so how do we get from where we are right now to actually get the list? So do y'all understand what I'm trying to get to? I'm trying to fill in all these blanks. So somewhere between 20 and 30 engagement sessions are created. And then I want to turn it over to staff, typically senior staff, maybe 2 or 3 members of senior staff would be involved to figure out who are those, what are the particular groups, or in some cases, particular individuals that ought to be included in some of those engagement sessions. So I left out an important piece, and that piece is, okay, so how do board members inform this? So board members, here's how you inform this. I want you to, and you have until midnight tomorrow. Between now and midnight tomorrow, I'd like you to look and review this list. You'll each do this individually, and you'll say, I really think this particular role needs to be represented, or this particular group, or this elected official, or our former board. I'm just throwing things out. I'm not recommending former board members or county commissioners or members of police department or whatever. Who do you think are the important groups that should, in order for us, right? Every voice is important in this entire community, but in order for us to meet our objectives of getting a deep dive into the district and also beginning this conversation about what's great, what are the complexities, who do we need to meet, recognizing that we can't, unfortunately, meet with every community member in the organization. And Director Marty, you have your hand up.
So there's certain individuals I have in mind that I think can bring some really good different perspectives. Each one is kind of unique. Certainly, I could put their name in an email, but I certainly would not want to put their personal contact information in there because it's public record. So, one, how do we, if they're individuals that, and maybe some of the criteria is kind of sensitive that, I could tell you about, but I don't want to put it again in public record, why they would be a good fit. So, how do we communicate that? And then also on the parent leaders, how do we submit names to be put into that lottery?
Okay, 2 good questions. Let me take the second one first. What we recommend with respect to parent, the lottery groups, you see employee groups by lottery, you see parent groups by lottery. For those lottery ones, we actually like to conduct a lottery. Basically, that means, so for employees, we would say, if you are interested in serving in an engagement session, please submit this very easy Google form. It goes in directly to us. We will randomly pick employees to serve in that. Same thing with a parent leader. Now it says by invitation or lottery. Sometimes districts will say, if there's a certain parent, if there's parent groups that are serving schools or certain parent kind of involvement opportunities, they might get you. The board would have to make this. Well, the board would make some recommendations around how we do this, but ultimately there'd be a lottery where we'd pick names out because there's probably more parents that want to be involved in the engagement sessions that we could we can populate the groups with, and we want to make sure it's fair. We don't want folks to feel like they get left out of the process. Your first question was if you have
a clarifying question on that.
Yeah.
So how are we going to communicate about the lottery? So I can say, parents, if you're interested, be watching for what?
Yeah, typically we'll work with the communications department to push out that material and say, here's an opportunity. Here's the Google form link. Please respond within the next 3 or 4 days. Here's the time of the meetings that you might be, so folks can sort of weed themselves in and weed themselves out and put their names in.
Okay.
With respect to your other question, I would much prefer to have group names than individual names coming from board members. That would make, that's what my preference. But I also respect the fact that you might, you did ask the question for a reason. So I would say that once we identify some staff people, which is the next part of this conversation, if there is a certain name, I'm not averse to you, reaching out and calling the staff person and say, hey, I just want to recommend so-and-so be considered. But in general, I'd much prefer that groups are listed than individual names.
Understand. Thank you.
I mean, just along the point that Marty made, can we get some clarification? I mean, my understanding would be that any person that engages in our public process would, I mean, it was part of the public record. So they would need that to be, unless it's part of the piece that we're going to keep confidential around the applicants. But engagement, that would be subject to public records
Okay.
requests. Your meetings with them would be my understanding.
Oh,
Maybe-
okay.
Maybe.
Yeah, Paul, you want to weigh in on that? That's a fair question.
Well, I
Thank you,
think
Ashley.
that if you create documents that you hold alone, those are not public records. So if there was a person who wanted to be involved, the district wouldn't need to have their contact information. You would need to have it because you would need to get in touch with them. So the fact that you have it and it's in your sole possession would not make it a public record. Sharing that with, there wouldn't be a need to share contact information with the board because it's only useful to you to make the contact. If you made notes about an individual's engagement, as long as you share those perspectives in an executive session, it would not become a public record. If we gathered them as a district.
And I think I need to clarify.
Okay.
I don't want to cut you off, but I think I might have inadvertently gone down a path which is not what I was intending. So let me dial back. What I thought I understood from Director Marty is if she has a recommendation that she'd prefer to do in a voice call to staff, because I'm not the one actually sending out the invites. And you tell me if I'm not okay, because certainly we need to follow statute.
Can I
But
clarify?
that would-
I don't want to put somebody's personal cell phone number in the public record. And certainly you need an email contact, and they may choose to create a different one that's not their normal to protect themselves. So I wouldn't want to put their normal email address necessarily in there so that you would have contact information, but it could not be used by somebody that shouldn't use it.
Yeah, I was not expecting that the composition of these groups would be confidential. That was not what I was thinking was being asked. I thought it was simply about the mechanism by which you communicate to staff. But once that person's involved in a engagement session, I don't think that's that's not a private record. That's a public record. Would you agree with me?
I don't mean their name. I mean like their cell phone. And maybe
Specifically their cell phone.
And if they wanted to, let's say I gave you an email address of XYZ, that's their normal email address, but for the purpose of this public part, they want to use a different one. So I wouldn't want the first one to be in the public record, and the other one could be, because obviously their names are going to be a part of the public record.
Okay.
My suggestion is that, I mean, these are great questions. My suggestion is we develop a protocol that offers some protection, and we don't need to do it tonight. But we need to have assurances for people that their private contact information wouldn't become public. And I think we can do that, but we don't need to do it tonight.
Okay, great.
So can I ask a question, please? I like the idea that you suggested, Mr. DeCarpolis. In the same lines, we also want to make sure they are the residents of Salem-Keizer. That's really important. So we want some kind of name, or if they really are from Salem-Keizer, so that parents and family members who live here, their children go to schools, are the ones who are getting picked in this lottery. So we have to have some kind of details to make sure they're the local folks.
Well, and just an example, if we're like the survey, we send that out through Parent Square, that
Correct.
only goes to parents.
There you go.
If we were soliciting parents that way, I don't know if we would, but if we were, it would only go to our parents. But, I think we can protect the, phone numbers and things like that. At the end of the day, some of that, it can be a public record. So I think that's the tricky part. And we
It
have
is a tricky part, but we'll do our best. That's all we can.
You bet,
promise.
you bet.
We can do the best. If everything becomes so anonymous, we don't know who is sitting in that group.
Fair point, fair point. Okay, thank you. So thanks for those questions. Going back, dialing back out a little bit. So what I would, the homework I would like to ask board members is, and I want to ask if it's too ambitious to ask for this by midnight tomorrow. Is that too soon? Do people need more time with that, or is that enough time to look at this list and say, I want to make sure that we consider this group, that group?
No
We're only
names,
talking
right?
Groups.
Yes.
Can you give us 48 hours?
If you would like that, I can.
I like 48 hours.
Okay, so tonight being the 4th. So by midnight on the 6th, if you could provide that information. And there's no obligation, board members. You don't all have to do that, but I know that's certainly some of you would probably want to do that. So now the question is to whom to provide it to. And I would recommend that there's 2 or 3 staff members, typically senior staff, who would be the who would figure out the puzzle pieces. And Superintendent Perry, I'm wondering if there's anybody, or can you think of anybody that I could be working directly with on your team that could play a role on that?
And you're thinking more than 1, 2, right?
I would say at least 2, 3 is also fine. It doesn't, more than 3 is probably too many.
Because I think I'm thinking maybe Assistant Superintendent Cobb and then COO Bob Silva, because they represent the both instructional side of the house and the operational and have different community views on things. And then if Sylvia could be part of that group, then she can bring in Caleb or whoever who would help manage and organize that. That's what I'm thinking.
I just want to also make sure that our student advisors have the ability to put in some input, because I mean, I know that here is some student groups that they, would like to be listed, at least 3 groups, and I think that they would know a bit better than we would.
Yeah, good.
And
Okay.
what I'm thinking is if they submit email, then the staff group could take it or reach out back out for more questions of the group. Maybe, is that how you think that might work?
It could, certainly it could.
Go ahead.
So who exactly are we reaching out to?
So actually, thank you for asking that, because I don't think I was clear about that. So it sounds like we have some senior staff that can be part of the solution, but for ease of board members, information flow, I would say board members within the next 48 hours, would you please send an email to Alice?
Mm-hmm.
She will be the collector of such emails. She will provide it to the team that you just described, Superintendent Perry. I will arrange time to meet with that team and we will plan accordingly.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And if it's helpful, I can have Alice send you each an email tomorrow, just so you have it at the top of your inbox.
And I'm
Okay,
putting it on your
wonderful.
calendars right now.
Perfect.
Thank you, board. Okay, the next 2 items are rather short, typically. Item number 6, I would love to just get a nod from board members, and it has to do with internal candidates. And it's my belief and my recommendation that if there are internal candidates, that they follow the very same process as external candidates and that they're held to the same metrics of external candidates. And therefore, if they get an interview, they will know it's because they were worthy of the interview.
Thumbs?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Great,
Okay. Marty, good with you?
fabulous. Thank you, board. Sati, I think you asked this question earlier. So it's about survey translations. Now, my understanding is that typically in Salem-Keizer School District, their documents are translated into 5 languages, I believe, right?
Correct.
And so I would assume that we would want to translate our community survey into 5 languages.
Yeah. I'm looking at Director McDaniels here. And within Parent Square and within the survey, depending on the format, we can also do some yep.
That is correct.
Okay.
We can translate in
Yeah. So 5.
languages, yes.
5. Okay. And Director Sylvia, I'll be able to work with you to figure out the mechanism, getting the surveys to your team to translate to get back to me. Thank you.
Can I offer one thing too? I know that we have some languages that the time it takes to translate, that is very time consuming. And what we might do is, if the board's interested, is to have a few people call directly to have families answer the survey. And we might say, we're going to choose 5 of our community resource specialists. We'd like each to call 3 families. And then we can do languages like Arabic or some of the languages.
I love
So
that.
if that works, that team could help do that.
That would be great.
Okay.
So that's beyond the 5, right? That's in the additional languages to make sure that we're
yes.
reaching families. I love that
Mhm.
idea.
Yes.
Superintendent Perry, just a correction, 6 languages we
Okay.
translate.
Thank you. Okay, board. The next question is titled, the next topic is titled Publicity Issues. And so I'd like to discuss with you a recommended process in line with what we've talked about earlier, and as far as publicity, for lack of a better word. And let me describe what I mean by that. There are typically 2 approaches that school districts take toward the superintendent search with respect to informing the broad public about the identities of finalists. And myself and Kathleen and our firm are a strong believer that it is not helpful to attracting great candidates to your school district if candidates know that their names will be publicized prior to you making a final decision. So you probably have at some point or points in your life opened up the Statesman or some paper and read that a district nearby, or this district, in fact, in the past has identified 2 or 3 finalists, and here they are, and here are their bios. That is a traditional superintendent search process that was very popular 20 years ago, and is still, well, I'll say still in vogue in some places. And we believe it's not particularly helpful. And there's a few really strong reasons, but perhaps the most compelling reason of all why we think that's not helpful is that, and maybe you've already surmised, is if you are, particularly if you are a sitting superintendent and doing really good work and have a great relationship with your board and your community, it is extremely risky to put your name out there and apply for another job in another school district and have your name put out in public space. It's risky because you don't know if you're going to get that job in the end. And if you don't get that job in the end, you have to go back to your home district and tell a story about why you didn't get that job, or maybe it puts folks in a very difficult position, or some will create a narrative where they say, well, I wasn't really interested in that job in the first place. But it does impact relationships strongly enough that many superintendents, I'll say there are the 2 questions that candidates, particularly experienced superintendent candidates, will ask when I'm on the phone with the first 2 are, tell me about the board, and Hank, Kathleen, will this be a public search? Will my name be out there in public? And I want to put that to you. There are some other reasons as well, but that's probably the most compelling piece of data I can give you right now, is that it absolutely will affect the quality of the candidates, particularly at the experience level, that whether you're revealing the names in public space or not. So our recommendation is that you don't, is that you follow a process similar to what we described when we went through the timeline, that involves some community members being actually interviewees, as we discussed earlier, and those folks would sign the confidentiality affidavit and commit to confidentiality. That's what we would recommend. Now, if you do make that decision, there will be some members of the community who will say, wait, that's not how we used to do it. We want to know who all the finalists are. We kind of want to do a meet and greet like in the good old days. And there will be some community members who might not understand your rationale of why you want to do this. We will support you, of course, either way, but we have a strong recommendation and we will give you the tools and the rationale, because I said there's other reasons why, although that's maybe the most salient one. We'll give you those tools so that you can say, you know what, we've made a decision that in order to attract the best candidates, we're going to do this. But you've got to come to that decision as a collective. It's your decision how you want to do that. I want to put that out there and just discuss, this is not a decision you're making tonight, but I do want to just allow for, maybe 5-10 minutes of conversation about either for you to ask us or maybe to engage with each other about how you might think about that decision.
Thank you, Chair. You know, I think I like your idea, Hank, of keeping that process confidential. Yet making sure that the process that we are following is transparent. So that the community understands why we are keeping it confidential and all the step by step in a transparent manner. Maybe that can be part of the website, which shows we are here now, we are here now, we are here then. That way, community has a way to know that we agreed upon process is being followed in it. So that's crystal clear. To me, that way you can find a balance. It gives us talking points to say we are in this step 3 now.
Right.
You can check in the website or whatever it is. Does that sound like a
Yeah,
reasonable balance?
I think
between
so.
the-
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Satya.
I'll just say I'm in complete favor of your recommendation.
I'm in favor. I have this kind of question in terms of what might be, just to kind of get a little bit of a better understanding of the process and the confidentiality piece, what might be some of the implications for the board through that like interviewing process and whatnot? I mean, what are the drawbacks? I think I see the overall assumption, you know, that it would create a larger pool of candidates, and that I am absolutely for, and definitely want to protect candidates, you know, current employment and whatnot, but just curious, like, how does that impact? I mean, thinking about even when we're doing reference checks, like, what does that look like? Because there are moments in that process
Yeah.
where folks will be reached out to.
Yes,
So,
that's great. So I think I would say the only drawback that I can think of is that folks who have been associated with another way of seeing superintendent searches over the years might sometimes have an expectation that that's how it's supposed to be, or even that that's how it's legally supposed to be. And so sometimes there is a set of expectations that if, you know, we just have to be really clear and have really justifiable and good and wise responses, which I think we have. But I think that's really the only drawback that I can think of. You raise a really interesting point around the reference checks, which is really an interesting moment in a confidential search. And so here's what it looks like. And it takes finesse. So let's say we have 2 finalists and we're going to do some deep reference checks. And when I say deep, this is what deep means in this part of the process. I think we probably need to talk to 12 folks from your school. This is my finalist right here from your, and I am not going to ask this person to give me 12 names, right? Because I don't want their 12 biggest fans. I want 12 people that have worked closely with this person and that can speak honestly. And I'm not expecting all 12 of those people to absolutely love, but I'm hoping that more of them love than don't love. But right, I want to get a fair and honest reflection of this person as a leader. And this person still wants confidentiality, right? So there is a finesse work as I work, and that's really my job, working with the finalists to say, because I will tell that person who are the 12 that I want to talk to. And sometimes a candidate will say, okay, Hank, I get it. This one person you chose will never be able to keep things confidential, right? So I've got to respect that too. And there has to be some give or take. And so if that's what somebody says to me, then I don't want to put them in a funny position and call somebody that is going to be unable to maintain confidentiality. At the other hand, I don't want the 12 biggest fans, right? So I work closely, and by that point, we've got a pretty good relationship. We've been working together for weeks and months, so usually there's a level of trust. And so that's how it ends up. And I'm thinking, I have a picture in my head of a former person that I worked with who became a superintendent in Oregon, was very anxious about this very thing. And at the end of the day, it worked. And we reached out to 12 or whatever, 14 folks. I'm sure I did pull back from one name that he was just very, very nervous about, but I was not going to cave either and say, well, you name your 14, because that wouldn't be fair and honest to the process.
thank you. That's helpful.
I think this is such an important point that you all have consensus on, absolute consensus. 7-0 consensus, because if you're committing to confidentiality and it is breached and someone loses their job in another district, that's on the board member who breaches the confidentiality agreement on this board. And so this is something we will have to take very seriously and really protect during this process. My other comments, I've done a lot of these, and I think Hank's right on.
Director Hyen.
Thank you. So I also think it should be confidential. So my question for Paul is, should, if the student advisors were a part of this, and of course the board's a part of this, if anyone were to actually say something that cost a person their job, what would be the ramifications? And since our student advisors are minors, I'm curious if that is a position we should put them in. Maybe we can have an interview or forms with no names on them, perhaps, some way to protect the identity of the people if the student advisors wanted to participate just for their protection, what would be the ramifications for us or them, or, if something got leaked out?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting question about the student advisors. And this is in no way a reflection of your honesty and intent.
No, I'd like to reiterate that has nothing to do with your integrity at all. This is just
But
because
it's an
you're minors.
interesting question because you can't, as a minor, you can't sign a legally binding document for yourself. So it would mean some kind of an agreement with your parent or your legal guardian. I mean, this is all kind of a new thought. We haven't ever had student advisors involved in the search process. And so you are in some ways the test case for us, which is great because you're both probably up to it, but we need to figure out, should we include you in the executive sessions? That's not my decision, it's board decision. And if we do, and you sign a confidentiality agreement, what protections do we have to have in addition to that? So I don't know the answer. The second question is, what are the potential ramifications? So if the board promises confidentiality for all involved, and again, we have this group of 30 that we also want to sign a confidentiality agreement. So now if we have 30 people,
Clarification. So the engagement sessions don't need to sign confidentiality.
they're not getting
They're providing input
Okay,
about,
okay.
I think as Sadia had suggested, confidentiality around. Right.
okay, so so the danger is if someone were to breach confidentiality, they go back to their home district who reads about them in the paper, and their school board decides if it's evident you don't want to be with us anymore, we will help you leave, whether you have a job to go to or not. Then there's a potential interference with a contractual relationship between them and their existing district, which would be a claim against an individual, not against the board. And the board member who did that would have breached an agreement that was reached by the board. So there'd be some personal risk.
Okay, I'd like to suggest, if we can, we'll iron out the issues with what components, maybe all, maybe some things for the student advisor issue that's been raised. But let's get the rest of the board members' opinions on the confidentiality related to the applicants and protecting them, and whether our first vice chair favors that route.
Yeah, I also favor the route of confidentiality, but I know that, since the recommendation is also to make sure that we have like full consensus, we're just have to wait a little bit. So we can get
Absolutely.
Danielle's input, but, I guess the only just little caveat that I did want to add on to that is just that now that Raylan and Isaac have all the information, and kind of take some time to process it and decide whether that's something that they want to take on as well.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I want to ask a related question. Sometimes when we are trying to bring in a candidate, we want to first keep qualification and merit as the first line. And then we want to intentionally make sure that there is a diverse representation, right? Are you going to kind of remove the name from the resume so that we get to see the resume without the name? And then if it cuts the first cut, that way we can make sure they have the best qualified experienced candidate. And there's no room for any implicit biases from our side. That was what we learned in one of the training. That's the reason I'm coming. I'm just pulling
Yep.
it out of one of the.
That's,
trainings.
I mean, I think it's a wonderful piece that some folks have incorporated into their hiring process. That's not our standard practice to do that, but certainly respect that can be helpful.
Right. Sorry, I just came out of my training. That's. the
Yeah.
reason.
Is that something we can ask you to do when you hand us the 40?
Yes?
Okay, great.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So we'll get feedback from Director Bethel too on this component,
Super,
I think tomorrow, right? And I'm in favor of it as well.
super. Okay. Thank you, board. Let's look at number 9. This is more just a heads up for something you'll talk about in the future. We're not talking about that tonight. Just want you to be aware of prior, maybe a no-brainer, prior to announcing the vacancy, you need to land on a range, a compensation range. What that will look like is we will bring to you some comp data of let's say salary. It's really salary plus some other things, but let's just call it salary for the ease of conversation. From comparator districts, we'll make a recommendation. It's no surprise to you. This is a very competitive market. We want you to be competitive, but you're in charge of the Salem-Keizer School District pocketbook. So you'll make that decision. I just want to give you a heads up that that will be something that you'll decide by statute. You'll need to have that conversation in open session. That's all.
So the compiled data like that would be in open session?
Yes.
Okay.
And to clarify, this is prior to
Mhm.
interviewing candidates. So this is not about landing on a candidate and writing a contract. This is about what are you willing to pay your future superintendent so we can share that information with candidates when we have conversations with them.
Yeah, no, yeah, I was just wondering,
Yeah.
because then like, so essentially in open session, we'd be discussing like what the like Salem City Administrator or like the Marion County.
Yeah, well, we typically stay in the educational landscape. If you were to ask for that, we're happy to pull that. We typically look at superintendents of like districts.
Okay.
There aren't a whole lot of like districts to Salem-Keizer in Oregon. So we'll look at some that are geographically close, but not the same size. And we might look at some that are the same size and a little bit outside of Oregon. And if it were important to look at city leaders, we could certainly do that.
Oh, okay, all right.
Yeah.
So Hank, would you recommend that if we need to have the discussion, and so you'll provide us the comps, then we have the discussion in open session, should we do that as well on the 30th of November?
That's actually a great day to do that. I would heartily,
Okay, so maybe have that meeting be 2 hours instead of 90 minutes to include the salary.
I think
discussion
so.
Longer?
I
okay.
think we could aim for 2 hours to do both of those.
Okay. Okay, we'll try to plan for that then.
Can I just ask a process question too? Is it still helpful that the chair kind of gives some updates in public at the next few board meetings? Like we have 27 groups that we're meeting with, that sort of high level. Is that helpful?
I think your public loves that. So I would say yes.
Okay.
And I would say the website should reflect that. And so
So-
that can also be really helpful.
And maybe, so by the last meeting in October, one of the updates is here's our website and here's the
Right.
groups we've, okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Okay, advertising. We would recommend a national advertisement for the Salem-Keizer superintendency. Those tend to be the pricier ones. Those tend to be about $800 or $900. There's basically $800 or $900, basically two publications that you see nationally posted, which is Education Week, and AASA, which is the Superintendent Association, and they're both around the same price. So let's say $900. And then we would post on COSA, which is free for Oregon districts. We would post in Washington State, which is free, which we would post in when I say Washington State, I mean the Washington State version of COSA. We have a relationship with the California version of COSA called EdJoin. We'll do that for free. We will invoice you for the advertising at cost. We don't upcharge you at all. There are a couple other websites that are sometimes, I think, particularly helpful in speaking to in interest and a welcomingness to diverse candidates, and that's the national. That is the I get my acronyms mixed up. One being the Latino Administrators Association, and one being the Black Administrators Association, both nationally, and those are a couple $100. So we would think an advertising budget would be under $2,000. If that's something that we can just nod, that would be great. If that's something that we need to propose and put into a consent agenda, we could also do that. Yes, okay, great, thank you. Board, we might be concluding within the next 7 or 8 minutes. Number 11 is an item that sometimes boards make decisions on real quickly, and sometimes boards really want to spend time thinking about. So let me just pose the question and see where you go with that. The residency expectation is this question. Must the incoming superintendent live within the Salem-Keizer School District jurisdiction? In the old days, that was always a definitive yes. And as the world has changed and life has changed, we've recognized there's all sorts of reasons why people might not live immediately in the jurisdiction and still be able to do an amazing job as a superintendent. So I know you can hear a little bit of bias in my voice. And some boards say, no, they need to live in this community. It's typically it typically becomes an issue when somebody who doesn't live far from the district, but already lives there. Maybe you once had a superintendent in this category who
She lived here.
right? It's if somebody's moving from across the country, typically they would live in the jurisdiction. But if they live nearby already and are doing great work, and there might be a really compelling reason why somebody doesn't want to sell their house to move a few miles away. So I put that out there. I think Satya, you have something you want to say around that?
That's what I was going to say. I mean, we don't want a virtual superintendent. That part is very clear, because in this day and age, I can sit here and run a school in Taiwan. So having said that, they need to be like Superintendent Perry has been living outside the jurisdiction, but still day and night, you can find her more here, there than our own home.
True.
So that's my only ask is we need to see the superintendent in real life in
Right.
our meetings and not a virtual superintendent.
Director Hyen.
Thank you. I only have one concern, and it's not a end of the world kind of thing, is if the new superintendent lives in the district, that superintendent will also be subject to the same bond taxes and school taxes that they are imposing on the other people that pay taxes in Salem-Keizer. And for that reason, I would like them to be in Salem-Keizer, but if that's a deal breaker, then it's, whatever. But I think it would be nice if they lived in Salem-Keizer.
I'm not opposed to having them live outside the jurisdiction. Relatively close, I'd hope.
Yeah.
Relatively close.
Yeah, I agree. I think it should be like, maybe like within like, yeah, like a 30-mile radius of the district, especially because things are expensive. So sometimes you want to live maybe a little further south or a little more rurally.
Do we decide this tonight?
You know, it's actually something I don't know that you really need to vote on. If I'm getting a
Okay.
consensus and I feel like I am, that's probably adequate. And I don't see
I'd be
our
fine.
council
That
telling
would
me.
be part of the hiring criteria,
Right.
which is, it sounds like you would be open to considering candidates who didn't want to live in the district, but you'd want to know where they'd want to live.
Yes.
One,
Can we apply a mileage like criteria? Like you must live within
Or would it
25 miles of the.
You can
must
do whatever
be
you
able to
want. You can
commute-
do whatever you want. So think about whether that's something
must be
you'd
able
want.
to commute Daily.
Yeah, must be able to commute daily, and then like if they impose a ridiculous commute on themselves, on them.
one thing that happened in my, the original hiring process said they wanted residency. And I negotiated a different provision in my contract related because my husband owned a business in the community we lived in. And I negotiated language in my contract that said if we sold our primary residence, I'd move. But what the heart of the issue was for the board at the time is they wanted a superintendent who was committed to the community. So that's the discussion. And you could see that in the criteria. And so when we got down to that final negotiation stage, I said, hey, here's how I will be committed to the community. So that community language was, which is, I think, what you're talking about. You don't want a virtual superintendent.
We don't want.
And
to
you
put
want
it-
that commitment to the community, to care and love for the community, but you, that doesn't always have to mean they live, but should be close enough that you can spend a lot of time here.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Chris.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. I'm good with that.
No, I was just saying like an hour drive max is perfectly
Yeah.
fine, acceptable for me, that they'll be committed. It's gonna be the long drive for them on
Yeah.
after a very long day. And that might consider them to move down, but I also want, coming down to like the details of having a fuel stipend. Well, that's not gonna be justifiable either to an extent.
Yeah, I mean, I see the value of it, but I don't think I would want just to define a number of miles. Because what if it is a little bit outside, but we get a good superintendent? So, that is the reason I just don't want to put a definite mile, but to say that the superintendent will have to be present in person and understand the community, are able to connect with different sections of our community and leave it at that. Because, but if we lock ourselves in 25 miles and God forbid, if the 27th mile is their home, and then we are really having to negotiate or make an amendment to the contract. And we don't want to lose a good candidate if there is somebody willing to come. That's the reason I just want to say.
Yeah.
But to put it in language saying they have to be available in person, not like a virtual one, is I would really like that language if possible in your advertisement so that people can't be sitting in California and trying to run a school here. That's one thing about.
Yeah, well, here's what I'd say, and I think I do hear a general consensus around board members. I would say, I mean, if somebody is thinking they're going to be a virtual superintendent of any district, let alone Salem-Keizer, like I need to put a kibosh on that in the very first phone call, right? Like that just can't happen. And although I don't think anyone's ever asked me about that, I certainly think there have been times, I'm reflecting in the past, where somebody's like, well, could I do it like 3 days a week? And that's a kibosh on that too. This is not a 3-day-a-week job. So if the board is okay with this, I think what I hear, here's what I hear. I mean, in general, I hear not necessarily has to live within the jurisdiction, but has to live pretty darn close because we expect to see that person every day and the work hours are long. And if you can do that from 5 miles away, it's probably okay. getting farther away, getting longer away. And I think you make a good point, like putting an exact mile could be a little bit problematic, but I would be having conversations with candidates as we move forward in the process. And if they're living an hour away, I'd be saying like, what's your plan? Because the board is not going to be pleased if you live 90 minutes outside of Salem like that probably is a bridge too far. So we could do one of two things. You could say, all right, Hank, carry that message and make sure that whoever we get knows that, or we could come back and we could fine tune some language around how far you're comfortable with.
I think just to have you carry that message.
I agree.
I agree.
Okay.
Yeah, I think when suggesting a mileage amount, obviously everything's negotiable, as Superintendent Perry mentioned. To me, the community piece that Superintendent Perry mentioned is where my head was,
Yeah.
because if someone's really ingrained in Portland or Eugene as a community member, that feels not as attractive to me. I
Mhm.
want them to be dedicated to the Mid-Valley, to Salem-Keizer. And so putting 20 to 30 miles kind of, if I was applying for that executive level job, I would be like, that pretty much means I need to move out of Portland or out of Eugene. Being
That makes sense.
the
That
big
makes sense
city
to
in the
me, right.
middle of those two big cities.
Yeah, well, and also I think like, maybe just like strongly encourage, because like, even if that wasn't like a consideration, which I mean, like 100%, like we want them to be invested in the Mid-Willamette Valley, but like, I think it would just be both terrible for them
Mm.
to have to commute that long and then get stuck in traffic, and then also just like if things do come up and not being so available, and yeah, I think it would just be bad. Raylan?
So I think Christy made a good point earlier, that like, I don't really think that it's a huge deal if they don't live like in Salem. Like if you lived in Turner's not that far away. But like if they did live in Portland, which is a little far, but like kind of if they sold their house somewhere to move, or were to move, that the expectation would be that they would move closer to Salem.
Good point. Good point. Okay. Okay, thank you, board. Thanks for that guidance on that. The last item, we've talked actually a little bit around this, is the background checks due diligence. And so the reason why that's here is that, so that's when we bring in the third party firm to actually do a full investigation check. Those are not super cheap. Those are $1,800. And I put that there, and here's why I put it here. I think it makes a ton of sense. I'm going to assume the board wants a background check on your next superintendent. In the old days, sometimes boards would say, once we get to the final, once we select our person, we'll do a background check. That's a pretty risky thing. And so I don't recommend that, but again, you are paying the fee for that. So I want you to know what you're paying. To me, it makes a lot more sense that you're doing the background check at the finalist stage. So in the hypothetical where you have two finalists, you're doing the background check on the two finalists, and then you're ready to make a decision. But I just wanted to put it out there because there is a dollar figure attached to that. And so I want you to be aware of that. You could go the other way and say, well, we're going to wait till our finalist person, and we can talk about that if that's what you prefer. It's a bit risky, but it is also a cheaper alternative.
Well, it's really risky, unacceptably risky, because now you're into a second superintendent search. You've already
That's the
sent
risk.
everybody away.
That's the risk.
You've already
Right.
made everybody mad because you didn't select them. And now you have to essentially restart it. So I agree with you, Hank.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hank, so you're saying that suppose the initial, you suggest 10 names. There is no background check for those 10?
Not a deep investigative background
But
check.
at
There's
least a basic
telephone
background-
reference check. Yes.
So it's not even a basic background check, like preliminary background check for those 10 names, or just a telephone reference check?
So I'm sorry. So telephone reference check and Google search check. We
Okay.
do those two things.
Okay, so then the finalists say two, as Director Avila said. So those are the two ones you will be doing like $1,800. To me, it's a good idea to spend $1,800 or more for such a big organization as ours. Because I was thinking for all 10 of them, you're going to do background check. That'll be even better.
We could, that's a big price tag.
I know, it's
Yeah.
a big price tag, but
Okay,
I agree with you.
okay. Okay, we're good.
One thing to note too is that all of these people have a professional license. So as long as, and that's a quick, easy
Okay.
search on a professional license.
Okay.
And so anything big, you'd know right away on
Alright.
those 10
Okay.
with the Google search because of the professional license, it would have something on it.
So basically, the Google search is nothing but you're going to check with the licensing body saying any claims are there or not, just like, is that what you?
That
mean by
was
Google?
not, I might defer to direct to John Bite too. So I was speaking specifically about Googling their names and going through the first 10 pages of Google to see if there's a news story around them, independent of licensure. And Superintendent Perry is correct that we should expect that they would all be licensed. I suppose there could be a situation where they haven't quite gotten their license yet, but that would be unlikely.
And out of state might need an Oregon
Yeah.
license, but they'll be licensed
Right.
somewhere.
So the only issue that I wonder about in terms of the licensure piece is if somebody's been sitting in a school district for many years and hasn't gone to a new district, then it would date back to if somebody got a DUI, the
Mhm.
district wouldn't necessarily know, licensure wouldn't necessarily know, right?
No, that's gonna be
Right.
your deep background check.
Right.
But they're not, anything big, they're not gonna come with a license in that first 10. It's the deep background check that gets you the rest of the story.
Okay.
Speaking of the deep background check, are there certain parameters around like the information that we would be getting? Because like, I mean, I don't need to know somebody's like credit score. I don't want that to be public record. or
No, thank you
something.
for saying that. I'm glad you pointed, so we, as in my team, will get the credit report and a summary. We will give you the entire report other than the credit score, because we don't want that to be in public space. We'll read that. We'll give you a summary that says whether, there are some, but in terms of like people's social and specific account numbers, thank you. We would not, you wouldn't want that, and we don't want that to live in public domain. So we would hold that piece on and give you everything else.
So I think it'll be like criminal background check or any reports of sex offense or all those things. That's what you're referring to as
Absolutely,
deep
absolutely.
background
I
check.
think there's like 15 criteria, but you've named
Correct.
2 of them, whether they're on that.
Like, teachers, doctors, etc. Those are the kind of things. Is that
Right.
what you're?
Absolutely. That's exactly what we're talking about.
Okay,
Yep.
Thanks.
Karina?
Yeah, well, I'm curious in that background check process, then do we set some parameters, or does that then become part of discussion for us to decide, like, that is something that we are not open to? What does that look like? Because some things might be legal that we might find and, or there
Yeah,
is no
right.
actual findings of some sort, but is that then an internal discussion?
So here's what happened. Here's why, again, it's so much better to do this before you've made your selection, right? So let's take the hypothetical 2 finalists, and let's say you have 2 very strong finalists, and then we get the background report. And we see that there is some court case from 2015 that turns up, and we're not exactly sure, because sometimes it's clear and sometimes it's court language, right? So you may or may not know exactly what it is. So we now know that we need to do a little bit more digging, because that might be something significant and it might be something insignificant. It might be that somebody got a divorce, and sometimes there's court paperwork around a divorce. And I'm thinking that probably wouldn't be something that would be a showstopper for the board, but something that's truly criminal might very well be something that, so we're going to make sure that you have that information before you make a final, and that should weigh in, but it's not necessarily a showstopper, right? It's based on what it actually is, that event that gets flagged. Did I answer your question?
I think so. And what I hear then is that the board would have that information, would make a decision with that information in hand, and then would have to rally behind the selected superintendent if we were, with whatever.
Yeah, exactly. That's exact. Thank you for saying that. It's,
Director, sorry,
Yes.
Director Hyen?
Thank you. So, I don't want their credit scores, but a credit score does give you an indication if they're going to be, if they're good with their personal finances,
Right.
they're going to be more likely to be good with a couple $2 billion. So how do you communicate that to us without communicating that to us, if you get my idea?
yeah, well, no, I think it's a great question. So here's what I say. So let's say that we see a bankruptcy from 3 years ago. That may or may not matter to board members, but I think it's important information for you to have. So that would be a data point for you to include in your deliberations. Does that, and some of you might feel like that's really a big deal, and some of you might feel like that's not such a big deal. And that's why there's 7 of you to figure that out. So that's what we would provide you, that with that knowledge, and you use it as you see fit.
Thank you.
Can I answer?
Go ahead.
So say as a physician, when I fill out my medical license, renewal, you have to self-report if there is any DUI, et cetera, et cetera. Is that the similar standard for superintendents? They fill out the licensure every 2 years. They self-report if there has been anything. Is that how it
It's-
is done? So that
I'm gonna say, John, do you want to take that question? That's okay. So I think I know the answer, but John might be more closely familiar with TSP than I am. The question is, why don't you ask the question again, Sanjay?
So the question is, and as a physician, every time you renew your license, you have to fill out a form since the last renewal or whatever it is, you have been arrested, or DUI or charged, or has there been any litigation against you, et cetera, et cetera. Is that similar thing that happens? So you can go to the licensing board of superintendents and look for if there has been any self-report or anything reported. Is this how it is done? Do they have like a licensing board which tells you in a public facing any charges or any DUI or any criminal case or any settled or unsettled litigation?
So Superintendent Perry may have some more to add, but that's a good question. The licensing boards don't look at criminal history. There are requirements for license renewal that usually have to do with ongoing education.
Okay.
There are certain crimes that are reported and that the licensing agency may take action on. And so there's important to do the deep background check that Hank's talking about, where we would look specifically at criminal history. The licensing board may or may not have that depending on the type of crime.
And then one additional item, and I'm assuming this is the case, but when we have applicants, they fill out a criminal background check. And on that, they need to disclose if there's anything pending. And a red flag would be if they've disclosed there's nothing pending and Hank in some initial work finds something pending. So, but that background check form is part of it, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
yep,
So
definitely.
they'll have to disclose that in the application.
A related question is, like, when I get a job in a state, they ask me to do a urine drug screen and this thing. Do they have anything like that for superintendent, teachers, et cetera? Just out of clarification.
There's no, I don't think, go ahead, John.
Yeah, that would be something that we would have to talk about as a new criteria. The only drug screening that currently is in place is for school bus drivers.
Thank you.
I have one thing for the board to think about, not specifically related to background checks, but we've been talking about licensing boards. And as you think about your criteria for a new superintendent, one of the things you need to think about is, must they be a current superintendent or have a superintendent experience? There are boards that look at non-traditional superintendents. You haven't talked about that, and maybe the assumption is only superintendents can apply for superintendent jobs, and that's fine. That's totally fine. But as we do our advertisement, this is part of the criteria. You need to decide that whether you're going to allow non-traditional applicants to apply for the job.
And Paul, just for clarification, when you say non-traditional, I assume you're meaning non-educational folks,
Right.
folks who maybe come from industry or something else. Is that's?
Well, we should clarify that it's if the candidates must be superintendents, that's one thing, or we can say they must be public education administrators. That broadens it. But if you want, and we see this occasionally, we want a business leader, or we want someone from the military who has that's what I'm saying is non-traditional.
That's the non-traditional, yeah, right.
And you can think about that as you think about what limitations you want to put on the applicants.
And that would all be refined in the criteria.
Yep, exactly,
Document.
exactly. Yep,
Okay.
yep.
All right.
No questions about 12. I had a question on advertising 10 once we conclude this piece, if I may.
I'm good with that.
Okay, I was just curious, if you could state again, what is the advertising that is done in state?
Sure. Sure. So we post in one place in state, which is COSA, which was the Council of Oregon, not Confederation anymore.
Coalition.
Coalition,
Yeah.
thank you.
Oregon
Coalition of
School
Oregon School Administrators. And in Oregon, we really have a one-stop shop, if you will, for job postings for superintendents. Every superintendent, I think, that's available is posted on COSA, and people in Oregon go there to look as well as to post.
As well as our own website.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. There will absolutely be a place on the Salem-Keizer website linking us to the application portal.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And real quickly, back to the background check.
Yeah.
Also include social media.
Yes.
All that, try to find ties that could bring negative publicity and hidden.
Inclusive. Yep. Of social media and news
Thank you.
stories. Yes. Thank you for raising that.
Okay, other questions?
Yes. I'm a little confused after Mr. DeCarpoulos. So what is the qualification for a superintendent? Now I'm kind of lost. Do you have to be in the education or anybody can apply for superintendent?
I guess that would be something that we would decide. And I mean, within certain parameters, of course.
You want me to take that? You want to take that?
Yeah, that's a great question. In the state of Oregon, you have to hold a license that's recognized by the Teacher Standards and Practices Commission, specifically to be a superintendent.
So it's not just a teacher or principal's license, you need superintendent license.
That's correct.
Okay, thank God.
Don't need.
John, would you mind, could you
Need a
send that to
celebrity
all of
teacher.
the board?
Yeah, I'd be happy to send the criteria.
Thank
And,
you.
and the criteria has changed. We have reciprocity with many states, but there's processes for superintendents in other states. If there's not automatic reciprocity, then they would go through a process to acquire an Oregon license.
Awesome, thank you.
And one final thing on that, the licensure name has changed over time. So depending on when people got the
Right.
license, so John will probably send you a list of here's the types of licenses in Oregon that. And that's the way we have the ability to evaluate staff and some of that.
Thank you, board.
So we're on 13 other things we should know, other things you should know.
If there's anything else for the good of the order.
Okay. Anything? And I think Hank and Kathleen are available for other questions that pop up for us, right?
You bet.
Okay,
Now and throughout the process.
awesome. Thank you. This has been really wonderful. I appreciate you spending your evening with us, and I'm really looking forward to this search. It's a big job, but very important work. So our last item is adjournment. And I am to remind everyone that the next board meeting is our regular business session, which will be held on Tuesday, October 11th at 6 p.m. It is now 8:31 p.m. and the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I wanted to rest my